When a controlling neighbor harasses her immigrant family over 3 inches of property line, a determined teenage girl uncovers decades of hypocrisy and discrimination to reclaim not just their land, but their right to belong in a community where power has gone unchecked for too long. As we dive into this story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you're against injustice and unfair treatment. Welcome to Mr. Black Stories. The measuring tape stretched across the freshly cut grass. 16-year-old Maya Rodriguez watched from her bedroom window as Mr. Whitfield, their next-door neighbor, meticulously measured the boundary between their properties. Again, this was the 3rd time this week. Maya's father stood nearby, arms crossed, jaw tight. The tension between the two men was visible even from a distance. When they bought the corner house 6 months ago, Maya's parents had been ecstatic. Their first home in America, a beautiful yard, a quiet suburb. No one warned them about Richard Whitfield. Maya's phone buzzed. Her best friend Zoe, "Boundary patrol at it again?" Maya texted back, "Yep, Dad looks ready to explode." Outside, voices were rising. Maya couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Her father, normally the calmest person she knew, was losing his patience. She slipped downstairs, pushing open the screen door just in time to hear Mr. Whitfield's declaration. "Your fence is 3 inches over the property line," he said, tapping the measuring tape. "I've been tolerant, but it needs to be moved, today." Maya's father, Eduardo Rodriguez, took a deep breath. "Richard, we've discussed this. The survey we had done shows the fence is exactly on the boundary. Your survey is wrong," Whitfield snapped. "I've lived here 26 years. I know where my property ends." Maya stepped forward. "The fence has been there since before we moved in, Mr. Whitfield." Both men turned, her father's eyes warning her to stay out of it. Whitfield's narrowing with disapproval. "This doesn't concern you, young lady," Whitfield said, but Maya had inherited her father's patience and her mother's fire. "It's my home too, and you're harassing my family over 3 inches of dirt." Whitfield's face reddened. "This isn't about dirt, it's about property rights, rules, order." He turned back to Eduardo. "Move the fence by the weekend, or I'll file a formal complaint with the city." As he stormed off, Maya caught her father's weary sigh. "I thought we left the petty tyrants behind in Venezuela," he murmured. Inside, Maya's mother, Lucia, was waiting. Her expression made it clear she'd heard everything. "That man," she hissed, "is looking for a war." Eduardo shook his head. "We're not giving him one. We'll just move the fence." "Papi, no," Maya protested. "He's wrong. Our survey proves it." "Sometimes being right isn't worth the battle, Carino." He squeezed her shoulder. "We have more important things to focus on." But as Maya watched her father call a contractor about moving the fence, something hardened inside her. This wasn't just about a fence. It was about being pushed around. About someone with power deciding her family didn't belong. And Maya Rodriguez wasn't going to stand for it. The next day at school, Maya cornered her friend Zoe at lunch. "I need information," Maya said, sliding into the seat. "Everything you know about Richard Whitfield." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Why? Planning a hit job?" "Just researching the enemy." Zoe's family had lived in the neighborhood for generations. If anyone knew the dirt, it was her. "Well," Zoe said, leaning forward, "he's a total nightmare. Works for the city planning department. His wife left him like 8 years ago. Smart woman. He's filed complaints against half the neighborhood for everything from trash cans left out too long to suspicious gatherings." She made air quotes. "Suspicious gatherings?" "My cousin's quinceañera. Apparently 40 Latinos celebrating was disruptive to community standards." Maya's blood boiled. "So he's racist on top of everything else." "He prefers to call it neighborhood preservation," Zoe rolled her eyes. "He's on the HOA board too. Not the president, thank God, but definitely the biggest pain." "Has anyone ever stood up to him?" Zoe shrugged. "People try. But he knows all the codes, all the ordinances, and he's got friends at City Hall." She studied Maya's face. "What are you thinking?" Maya twirled her fork. I'm thinking it's time someone taught Mr. Red Whitfield a lesson about being a good neighbor. That afternoon, instead of going straight home, Maya went to the city records office. The clerk looked skeptical when a teenage girl requested property records for her street, but Maya had practiced her story. It's for a school project on urban development and property rights, she explained, the perfect, earnest student. I'm hoping to study law someday. 20 minutes later, she was poring over maps and surveys dating back 50 years. And that's when she found it. The property line between the Rodriguez and Whitfield homes had been redrawn in 1998. The original boundary was actually 5 feet into what was now Whitfield's prized rose garden. Whitfield hadn't just been wrong about the fence. He'd been encroaching on their property for decades. Maya snapped photos of the documents with her phone, heart racing. This wasn't just evidence, it was ammunition. At home, her parents were surprised by her discovery, but reluctant to use it. Maya, escalating the situation won't help, her father said. But Poppy, he's the one encroaching. His whole garden is on our land. Her mother touched her arm. Sometimes being neighbors means letting things go. Maya couldn't believe what she was hearing. So we just let him bully us? Move our fence for no reason? What's next? Her parents exchanged a look that Maya recognized. The immigrant's dilemma. Stand up and risk everything, or keep your head down and survive. We pick our battles, her father said finally. And this isn't one worth fighting. But that night, as Maya lay awake listening to her parents discuss the cost of moving the fence, she made her decision. If they wouldn't fight back, she would. The next morning, Whitfield found a printout of the original property survey in his mailbox. No note, just the evidence, highlighted in yellow, showing the true boundary line. Maya watched from her window as he studied the paper, his face turning from confusion to disbelief to anger. Phase 1, complete. At school, she recruited Zoe and their friend Tyler, whose father was a contractor. I need stakes, Maya explained, and marking tape, the kind they use for construction sites. Tyler frowned. Why? Justice, Maya replied with a grin. That evening, after Whitfield left for his weekly HOA meeting, the 3 teens crept into his yard. Using the original survey coordinates and a measuring app on Tyler's phone, they marked the true property line with bright orange stakes and tape. Right through the middle of Whitfield's prize-winning rose garden. He's going to lose his mind, Zoe whispered, suppressing a giggle. That's the idea, Maya replied. What do you think about Maya's actions? Leave a comment below and hit that subscribe button now to see how this story turns out. By morning, the whole neighborhood was talking. Whitfield stood in his bathrobe, staring at the orange line cutting through his garden, his face a shade of red that nearly matched his roses. When he spotted Maya watching from her porch, his eyes narrowed to slits. You, he hissed, storming toward her. You did this. Maya stood her ground. I just marked the actual property line, Mr. Whitfield, according to the original survey. She tilted her head. You seem very concerned about 3 inches of our land. I thought you'd want to know about the 5 feet of ours you've been using. This is vandalism, trespassing. Actually, Maya said calmly, since that's our property, I can't trespass on it. But you've been trespassing for years. Whitfield's finger jabbed the air between them. Your family has no idea who you're dealing with. I'll have you reported for destruction of property. My roses, Maya gasped in mock horror. Oh wait, those are your roses, on our land. As Whitfield stormed off to call the police, neighbors emerged from their homes. They'd been watching the confrontation from windows and porches. A few gave Maya subtle thumbs-ups. The police arrived quickly. Officer Ramirez, Maya recognized him from community events, looked tired as Whitfield demanded Maya's arrest. She vandalized my garden, put these stakes through my roses. Ramirez turned to Maya. Is that true? I marked the original property line, Maya explained, showing him the survey on her phone. Mr. Whitfield has been insisting our fence is 3 inches onto his property, but according to the city records, his garden is actually 5 feet onto ours. The officer studied the documents, then looked at the stakes. He rubbed his forehead. "Mr. Whitfield, this looks like a civil matter. If you want to dispute the property line, you'll need to take it up with the city planning department." "I work for the city planning department," Whitfield shouted. "Then you should know the process," Ramirez replied evenly. As the officer left, Whitfield turned to Maya, his voice low. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Maya smiled sweetly. "I certainly hope not." The next week was quiet. Too quiet. The fence remained where it was. Whitfield avoided the Rodriguez family, though Maya occasionally caught him staring at their house with undisguised contempt. Then the letter arrived. Official city letterhead. A notice of multiple code violations, including unauthorized structure modifications and improper waste disposal. Maya's parents were bewildered. "What unauthorized structures?" her father asked, reading the notice. "We haven't built anything." The fine was $1,500, with additional penalties if the violations weren't addressed within 30 days. Whitfield had made his move. That night, Maya found her mother at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, worry etched on her face. "We don't have this kind of money right now," Lucia admitted softly. "Not with the mortgage and your father's business just starting." Maya's chest tightened with guilt. "This is my fault. I pushed Whitfield too far." Her mother shook her head. "No, Mija, men like him have been pushing people like us around forever. You just pushed back." She squeezed Maya's hand. "But now we need to be smart, not just brave." The next day, Maya went to Zoe's house after school. Zoe's grandmother, Mrs. Castillo, had lived in the neighborhood for 50 years. If anyone knew the history of the area and its residents, it was her. "Whitfield?" Mrs. Castillo snorted when Maya mentioned his name. "That man was born with a ruler in his hand, measuring everyone else's shortcomings." "He's using his position at the city to target my family," Maya explained. Mrs. Castillo nodded thoughtfully. "He's done it before, the Patels last year, the Nguyens before that." She looked at Maya. "But he's not invincible. Everyone has secrets." "Do you know his?" The old woman's eyes twinkled. "I know he's very proud of that garden. Wins the neighborhood award every year. But I also know he doesn't exactly follow the water restrictions the rest of us do." Maya leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "During the drought last summer, when we were all limited to watering twice a week, his sprinklers ran every night. Some of us complained, but nothing happened." She tapped the table. "And that shed he built 3 years ago? No permit. I know because my son-in-law works in the permits office." Maya's mind raced. "So he enforces rules he doesn't follow?" "Most tyrants do, Mija." Armed with this information, Maya began her research. City water ordinances, building permit requirements. She spent hours at the library, taking notes, making copies. Then she called Tyler, whose drone hobby was about to become very useful. "I need aerial footage," she explained, "of Whitfield's backyard, specifically his sprinkler system in that shed." Tyler whistled. "You're really going all in on this, huh?" "He messed with my family," Maya said simply. The drone footage was perfect. It clearly showed Whitfield's elaborate sprinkler system, far more extensive than regulations allowed during drought conditions. The shed's dimensions also exceeded the size permitted without special approval. But Maya wasn't done. She compiled a dossier. The water usage violations, the unpermitted shed, and most damning, a pattern of selective enforcement against non-white homeowners that she'd uncovered by cross-referencing code violation records with census data. Her evidence in hand, Maya bypassed Whitfield's department entirely. Instead, she emailed everything to the city manager, the local newspaper, and every member of the city council. Subject line: selective enforcement and abuse of power in the planning department. Then she waited. 3 days later, a different city employee showed up at the Rodriguez home. He apologized profusely, explaining that their code violations had been entered in error and were being dismissed. That same afternoon, 2 inspectors visited Whitfield's property. Maya watched from her window as they measured his shed and examined his sprinkler system, taking photos and making notes, while Whitfield gesticulated wildly. The next morning, the local paper ran a small but pointed article about allegations of discriminatory enforcement patterns in the city planning department. By the end of the week, Whitfield's roses were wilting under the strict twice-weekly watering schedule now being monitored by the water department. And Maya's parents received an official notice that their fence was, in fact, correctly placed according to current property records. The final blow came at the monthly HOA meeting, which the Rodriguez family attended for the first time. Maya sat quietly as Whitfield tried to propose new, stricter landscaping regulations, clearly aimed at several immigrant families who had planted vegetable gardens in their front yards. When the proposal came up for discussion, Maya raised her hand. "Mr. Whitfield seems very concerned about community standards," she said when recognized. "I'm wondering if those standards include following city regulations about water usage during droughts or obtaining proper permits for structures." The room fell silent. Whitfield's face drained of color. "Because if we're going to enforce rules," Maya continued, "shouldn't we start with those who claim to uphold them?" The HOA president cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should table this proposal for further review." Whitfield stormed out before the vote was called. As the Rodriguez family walked home under the summer stars, Maya's father put his arm around her shoulders. "I wanted to protect you from conflict," he said softly. "But instead, you taught me something important." "What's that?" Maya asked. "That sometimes fighting back isn't just about winning, it's about showing others it can be done." They reached their front yard, where the fence still stood exactly where it had been built years ago. On the other side, Whitfield's roses were struggling under their new, restricted watering schedule. "Do you think he'll leave us alone now?" Maya asked. Her mother smiled. "I think Mr. Whitfield has learned that some battles aren't worth fighting." The next morning, Maya found a small potted rosebush on their front porch. The card attached had just 2 words, written in shaky handwriting: "Property lines?" Maya placed the plant exactly on the boundary between the 2 yards, where it could be watered from either side. A peace offering, or perhaps surrender. Either way, Maya Rodriguez had won more than just 3 inches of dirt. She claimed her family's right to belong. And not even Richard Whitfield could measure the value of that. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this.